you can't tell like what you were excited about or what you thought was terrible earlier. The
Right.
things you were excited about, that one day, later on you cut them because they're no good. The
Yeah.
things you were like when you had the flu and it was just like you didn't want to write, but you did it anyway, and you just were like, this is just trash. Sometimes that's some of the best stuff.
Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 477. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and award-winning publisher and author, Dr. Jonathan Ball. You have scores of books that you've written in poetry, and as you mentioned, you do some horror, and you are here to talk a little bit about, it has not been publicly released yet, but you just put together your first graphic novel, correct?
Yes, I've done comics before. We did some comic series for heavy metal called
Mm-hmm.
The Eye Collector, but they ended up not getting collected into a trade form, and then we end up taking the rights kind of back from heavy metal just because of the technicalities of how heavy metal's business evolved. We still like heavy metal and everything, but it just became clear they weren't going to do them as a book. So we just we'll end up doing it later as a book. So my first like graphic novel, is this Last Breeds book that I'm very proud of. So it just so happens that my first, graphic novel is a nice fancy hardcover. It's got, a cool slipcase, the publisher gives you. It has a magnetized, clasp. It's a beautiful kind of full color book. I was lucky to work with this artist, Scott Henderson,
Wow,
and a
that's
team of other
gorgeous.
co-writers and creaters. And I even had got a Scott Snyder blurb on the back, so I don't know. I can't go any higher than this. I feel like it's all downhill from here.
So talk to us a little bit of it. So it's, as you mentioned, it's called Last Breeds. And so give people a little bit of background on what the book is about.
Yeah, well, the book is sort of set in a somewhat a futuristic place where this company, Gencor, has poisoned the world. They didn't mean to do it. They were trying to save the world. Utilizing cloning technology, they ended world hunger by replicating, food and started to span out of that and do other things. They gave you a robotic psychiatrist, that you can talk to for a subscription fee. They kind of became the biggest company in the world. Their tendrils were everything, but the core of it was this cloning tech that was, basically at its core ending world hunger. But what it produced was this situation. This sort of sci-fi. This is the sci-fi situation of the book. It produced a situation where the humans' Hayflick limits were shortened, and for the Hayflick limit is the limit of times that your cells can divide before they degrade, in essence. And so what it ends up doing is, because of this sort of technological shift that have happened and the kind of pervasiveness of the cloning tech in the culture, we get a situation where children can't live past puberty, more or less. And so society sort of has this collapse. Now, this has all happened in the backstory when the book opens. And so we kind of begin with Bale, who is the heir of this company, who kind of abandoned and turned his back on this company before, the great collapse of it. He's been kind of laying low surrounded by these wild animals that he has kind of had, since he was a child. They've had this private zoo. So he's had tigers around, is sort of the thing. He's more comfortable with animals than people. He's sort of a weird celebrity isolate. He's roaming around this post-apocalyptic landscape with, this tiger, these animal friends. And he ends up, and there's sort of a sci-fi way that he ends up kind of controlling them on a certain level, and kind of is leading this pack of, crazed wild predators. And then they find a girl who has managed to live longer. And so now it becomes about the sort of goal of the story. Then becomes about how do we get this girl to the GenCore laboratory, which has basically been, you the scientists have had to hide inside of it in a compound because everyone wants to kill them. Break back into his family laboratory, see if they can use this girl to somehow find some cure or way to resolve the situation. So it becomes sort of this trek across America in this post-apocalyptic landscape that's sort of told in a few chapters, where we've got these, all this great, animal action, fighting battles, and other, tigers versus cannibals, and all sorts of fun, cool stuff. Drawing this, really, by the Scott Henderson, who has this really fantastic kinetic style. But then, philosophically, the background of it is sort of all about, how are these machines sort of changing what it means to be human? How is it, where are we maybe going on us if we're not careful? One of the things that was kind of difficult was we were writing this book, me, Matthew Medney, and Jimmy Kmichik all sort of were writing the story together. So that I would script it out and kind of be the main one in control of, how exactly that script was getting put together. But it was based on all of us writing together and kind of breaking the story together and making plans together, and even just, doing co-writing in the script and so on. And one of the problems we kept running into is we'd be like, all of a sudden we'd be like, hey, somebody did the thing. We were just talking about it, this crazy, cool sci-fi idea one week, and then the next month it's in the news.
And so that's kind of get to my next question is like, how does this world kind of reflect or exaggerate concerns that you see today?
Well, I think the core concern that I see it reflecting or exaggerating, it's not particularly tied to any specific technology. Like, of course, there is the cloning, that technology of cloning. We've got AI tech was in the news lately, and there's all sorts of technology that we're dealing with in different ways. And it's good and its bad sides, but ultimately, I think what pervades everything is this cultural attitude towards technologies, and it's just basic cultural problem of corporatization. And what I mean by that is, regardless of what the technology is, what we're talking about, there's this corporate structure that has sort of taken over not just America, but the world. But I think America kind of represents it best, where they really are predicating everything on quarterly growth. And so you have, because of the demands of the corporate structures of quarterly growth, you have them just releasing tech too early. You can see with the AI, they've released it too early. It does not work. Perhaps it will work. Perhaps it will never work. But it doesn't work as advertised. It can maybe do certain things and other things it can't do. But meanwhile, they have to keep ramping it up. They have to ramp it up every quarter. They need more money now. And it is not a good situation. You end up doing things like Google has done. You make your search worse, which is the intentional thing that Google did. You can find the records of this. They made their search worse so that it would not work as well. People would have to search multiple times, and therefore they'd get to see more ads. That kind of thinking produces all sorts of after effects you don't intend that can be really deleterious, particularly when you start hooking these machines and these software programs into things like, military systems, where perhaps they can't be easily hooked out. So just that cultural attitude of where we lack forethought and we're rushing into things, and we're not necessarily testing as much as we should because of the demands of this kind of corporatized system. I feel like it kind of creates a situation of here's a bad situation where you suddenly can get cascading effects. And we're seeing it with, anxiety rates related to social media. And we're going to see it with, this reality distortion that's caused by AI. So more than really tying to any particular thing. We really wanted to kind of play with this idea that this company has its fingers everywhere,
Hmm.
and they mean well. They have this great goal, um, but they have a sort of hubris, and they're not really thinking things through.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Like, how did you decide to include the predator animals as allies? And does that symbolize anything?
So that was Matt Medney's original idea. So this book started when Matt Medney was the CEO of Heavy Metal when we met him. And he had picked up our book, The Eye Collector, and we were having these meetings we were really surprised, me and Gregory, because we had done this crazy, weird book that we didn't think anyone would like because they're just so strange. And then immediately Heavy Metal was in on it. And then we started having this kind of interesting experience where every time we contacted the company about anything, the CEO would get back to us. And we started wondering, does no one else work at Heavy Metal? But we had all these contact with other people. So it became clear, no, this is a real large company on a certain level. It's an indie company, but still it's a sizable, significant company, particularly back then. But it just sort of became clear that he liked our work. He liked kind of what we were doing. And we just sort of started to kind of connect with this guy and kind of vibe with him a little bit, And so as our book was sort of going through the process and as most of our work was winding up on it, and we were just kind of getting ready to publish and things, we ended up having this meeting with him where Gregory asked Matt kind of at the end of the meeting, hey, what's the thing that you wish you were working on? If you weren't so wrapped up in being the CEO of Heavy Metal, because we knew he was also a writer, what would you be doing? And he said, I'd be doing this book that he kind of described as, this asshole Tarzan. This guy who is he's got all these animals, and he's kind of like this dude, and we're in a sci-fi wasteland, and he kind of laid out the bare bones of what the story was. And being Gregory kind of went away with it and thinking, there's something kind of in that. Gregory, who's an illustrator as well, was like, I wouldn't want to draw that. He's like, I don't want to draw animals. It's too hard to draw animals. Plus it requires a lot of face acting and a lot of other things that I can do. But I just, I don't have the time to do that right now with all my projects. We had this Eye Collector book we were prioritizing as an example. But he said, but Scott Henderson, who we knew, he can really do that stuff well. And so we ended up kind of, roping him into this plan, and we kind of basically went back to Matt after developing the story idea out a little bit, and kind of pitched it back to him, and then we all started working on it. We came up with this last piece name and so on and so forth, but it sort of really just began. I don't know honestly where Matt got the idea originally, but he had this idea that he kind of wanted animals in it, like this guy to be fighting alongside animals. They should all be predators, because we want battle scenes. He had, I'm sure a bunch of thematic, artistic ideas behind it, but it very quickly kind of went in a different direction, I think, than he had originally envisioned, just because we decided to really play up the sci-fi angle of it, and justify why do these animals listen to the guy and so on. And fundamentally, we just sort of liked that idea because it was different. We hadn't really seen, for good reason. It's hard to draw animals, and unless you have a guy like Scott who can really do it and is really willing to do it, it's a nightmare as an artist to do this kind of work. And so you don't tend to see it a lot. When you do see it, it doesn't tend to be so bombastic, and if it is, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of depth. So I kind of like the idea on a personal level. What Gregory and Matt saw in the idea, I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. But on my approach was, I liked how it shouldn't work. I'm kind of drawn to ideas like that. That are hard to make work. And I felt like, you have a sort of mainstream, over the top superhero style bombast, which is cool and fun, but can it kind of have a depth? Like, can you marry it with a real serious, concern, or set of concerns, some real character work? I just feel like it was a good project for me personally to kind of connect a kind of mainstream approach to like an indie approach, because I really like those sort of in between spaces. So we ended up,
Right.
with kind of a big two art style, but then we colored it with this really interesting like two, like mostly red and greens combined in a kind of weird, interesting sort of way. So
Right.
I just like the discordance of it, frankly, and the fact that you got all this. Anytime it was dragging, you could have an animal jump in and chow something down. But you could also make the animal interactions have some interesting character depth. You could develop the animals as characters. Some of the saddest moments in the books are when one of the animals dies.
Right.
Although it became a logistical nightmare to keep track of how many animals were there, and once it's dead, you want to bring it back on the next page by accident, right? So we had to like track. I had like a spreadsheet where I was tracking like what animals were alive and what were not alive. There's a shot where we see like all the animals early on, and then I was like, okay, those are the animals we got. We're not going to deviate from that.
Right.
I'm sure Scott wanted to kill me by the end.
And so did you, what did you prefer working on? Did you prefer working on like the character development side of the story, or did you like more of like the epic action side of things? Or what seems to be like what you kind of gravitate more towards, Jonathan?
Um, I don't really like either of those things as a writer, frankly. As a writer, what I like is formal problems. So I'm a real stylist and a real formalist. So I like, to me, what's interesting is just the amount of space between two panels. Things like, how do you make the flow work, the pace work, and how do you get the tension to work, and the kind of sense of pulling the reader forward. All those things are to me more interesting. But then as I was writing it, I really started to get into finding a quiet character moment, in the midst of bears tearing apart drones, and tigers eating cannibals. Could you find a quiet character moment? Which and one of my favorite moments in the story is when this one of our villain antagonist figures is sort of talking before the collapse. She's talking to her therapist, which is a robot, and she's just sitting there saying nothing. And so the robot asks her, "You're quiet today," and she says, "Well, sorry, I don't really want to talk. You get paid either way, right?" And the robot goes, "Always the caretaker. How does that make you feel?" And I just like those little quiet moments, like, because to me that really cuts to who she is. Like, she doesn't want to really participate in the therapy, but she wants to make sure the robot is getting paid. And I think there's like interesting, weird dynamic there. I really like those sorts of weird, quiet moments. There's another moment where a character, a different character, is sort of talking to. They're sort of like prepping something while this horrible battle is going on in the background, but they're having a quiet little moment together. And then one character sort of asks, "What was my mom like?" Because she never met her mom. And then the other says, "She was the worst." So it's kind of this funny, like, it comes out of nowhere. Like, I still miss her, but right. She was the worst. So to me, it's like, I like moments like that where it's like it kind of sets you up for something, but delivers the opposite of being what you expect. But it is sort of delivering something interesting, and then it has this contrast with what's going on in the background. Like, I really like those sorts of problems of how do you figure out a way to unsettle the reader and kind of knock them off what they expect, but still be delivering the kind of things they want.
Would you consider this like sci-fi horror, right? Is this what you consider mostly?
Yeah, it's probably more sci-fi action, but I try to get some horror into things whenever I can. So there's some gore in there and some, there's some sort of darker stuff in there, but it's a bit more of an action book than perhaps I've done in the past, for sure.
I know, because you are, as we mentioned earlier, as a writer, and it does kind of go into what you're talking about with the therapy piece. is writing a form of therapy for you?
I mean, it could easily be. I try not to
Yeah.
think about that. I feel like my poetry is closer to that. I do kind of
Okay.
weird poetry where like my poems are about like Leatherface
Yeah.
rather than say about how I feel exactly. But and my joke is, as a straight white male, my emotions are already represented in the culture, and so I don't need to write a bunch about how I feel. I can
Right.
go read someone else to find out how I feel. I want to write about something else that's more interesting. But
Right.
that's a bit of a lie in a sense because, of course, you're getting things out. To really get somebody else engaged, you have to kind of put something in there.
Right.
And so, to me, it's I don't know if it's a therapeutic thing so much, but I really like to play around with ideas, and I really do find it's a place for me to kind of explore that
Mm.
maybe is a bit more accommodating than daily life when you kind of got to do things the way they have to be done,
Right.
and you don't get to play around it quite as much.
And do you feel like when you get when you sit down and write, how do you feel after you write? Do you feel like you've put something out and you feel kind of relief, or do you feel you get your energy is up afterwards, or uh, how do you feel after a writing session?
Well, I write all the time because I'm a full-time writer, so to me it's just sort of what I'm
It's
doing
the
that day.
job, yeah.
Once in a while you'll have a really standout moment,
Right.
so you kind of get those once in a while sessions where you're like, wow, it really just you just feel great about what you wrote. It often isn't any good. Often if you go back, I always make the joke that later on when you go back and look at the book when it's all done, you can't tell like what you were excited about or what you thought was terrible earlier. The
Right.
things you were excited about, that one day, later on you cut them because they're no good. The
Yeah.
things you were like when you had the flu and it was just like you didn't want to write, but you did it anyway, and you just were like, this is just trash. Sometimes that's some of the best stuff. It's hard to know because it's a process. So because it's a process, and because I try to look at writing as a craft process, to me, like individually, how I feel on any given day is not that important. So I
Right.
try to enjoy it. When I do something I'm like in the moment, I try to kind of get excited about it. But it's sort of what I do. It's like digging a ditch on a certain level. So yeah, I mean,
Right.
I like it, and it's exciting to me in moments. But you can't expect those moments to. You can't just rely on those moments. You just sort of have to do it anyway.
Right.
But I try to really enjoy the moments when it comes, and when you get that great idea, it's it is really cool. Like I
Yeah.
still love little moments in this book like that where
It's amazing. Like, as a writer, you get several opportunities of that endorphin rush. Is the one when
mm,
you sit down and write and you finish something, or when you read it, like that's really cool. When you get the book together and you get that draft together, that's another one. Getting it published is like, wow, I can't wait for someone to read. What Without giving a scene away, is there a specific part in Last Breeds that you like, oh, I can't wait till they get to that part? Like, is there some
there
of those
is, yeah. There's
sections?
a billboard, a joke billboard in the background of one of the scenes where it opens on this. One of the things I really like about the process, where I get more of those aha, I'm so excited moments, is in comics when I do work in comics and I'm collaborating, and the art comes back to me. Uh, or if I'm in film doing something in film and like you see the thing built, like, and it kind of goes from just being a stupid idea you had to like somebody made it,
Right.
or they drew it and it was even cooler than you thought, or they added something to it in the background. Stuff like that to me is really invigorating and exciting. I guess
Right.
you jazzed up for the project again. But the thing that's like that is this is stupid joke in Last Breeds, whereas there's this one point where because we got these animals, right? So I was like, and at one point they end up in LA. And so there's just this dumb joke in the one point where this wolf is like looking up and it sees this billboard for Lassie X, which is like a lassie, but she's a Terminator kind of robot. And the joke says, this time, her bite's worse than her bark. And it's just such a dumb joke. And I made Scott draw it, and like it looks so good. And it's just like, so you have like this wolf quizzically, like, what is this thing? And it's like all that's left in the ruined landscape is this stupid movie poster for some movie no one ever wanted to see or did see, you know. And I love little. That's my favorite little weird thing, where it's like it doesn't really matter to the story at all, but it's just my private little joke, and I just love that I made Scott draw it. Something so stupid.
It would be easier to probably order it off of strangerfiction.ca.
Or Gungnir books. It depends where you are, right? If you're in Canada, strangerfiction.ca is where you want to get it. Or, you know, if you come to a convention, I'm often at conventions where my partners are, who are also in the book. If you're in the US, I would say you definitely want to go to Gungnir, publisher Gungnir. You can see on the screen there. Their website, you know, they're selling the book. You can get the book earlier than it releases, you know, from a company, from the publisher like that. It's just, you know, my shipping will kill you if you're in the States, and their shipping will kill you if you're in Canada. So you just sort of, you know, you want to get things from me in Canada and them probably everywhere else. Or, you know, pre-order. If you don't mind waiting for the book, you know, you can pre-order it pretty much anywhere you want to. It works for you. But the book does exist, like I'm holding it in my hands. It's just, you know, we have our copies before they hit the store shelves. And so can you, you know.
That's right. So yeah, so they could, as you said, they can go to gungearbooks.com and they'd be able to get it. And that's
they got
available.
Lots of great books, those guys.
Yeah.
I really like Chupacabra, Tales of Blood and Ink there. Is the other one I really recommend. That's a really fun book.
So it is available then. They can order it now.
It's available from the publisher directly.
Right.
Gungnir, absolutely, yeah. With the cool collectible slipcase. You can see
that's amazing.
They did a great job on this.
Right.
So especially your audience, it's probably best to go there, I would say.
Okay.
And so the book is great. It helps everyone to pre-order the book. The problem with getting the book from us directly is, you know, nobody tracks that in a way that booksellers care about. But you know, it works for you because you get books early.
Jonathan, you know, we could spend 8 hours talking because you have so much knowledge and so many things that you've created. So you're going to have to come back on again sometime and we'll talk more about some of your work. So.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome.